welcome to the third talk in Sun Valley Museum of Art's new lecture series, Museum Passport. I'm Allison Fowdy, Assistant Curator of Public Programs at the museum. I have the great pleasure tonight of introducing Dr. Elena Shtromberg, Professor of Art History at the University of Utah, who will be speaking this evening about the life and work of Frida Kahlo in connection with the exhibition Frida, the Making of an Icon, currently on view at the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. The exhibition opened in January 2026, and departing from a traditional retrospective format is the first major exploration of the artist's transformation from a relatively unknown local painter to a universal icon and global brand. Dr. Shtromberg is Professor of Art History at the University of Utah. She received her PhD in Art History from UCLA and is a scholar and curator whose work focuses on modern and contemporary Latin American art, with particular attention to the intersection of art, politics, and media. She's the author of many things, but I'll just mention a few: Art Systems, Brazil in the 1970s, and co-editor of Encounters in Video Art in Latin America. In addition to her scholarship, she has curated and contributed to a number of major exhibitions on Latin American and Latinx art, including Video Art in Latin America at LAX Art, a project associated with the Getty Foundation's Pacific Standard Time Initiative, and Transgresores, Male Art Messages, 1960s to 2020s at California Museum of Photography at UC Riverside, an exhibition co-curated with the Getty Research Institute, and she told me today it is traveling, so it is traveling, so you can still see it. Through her research, writing, and curatorial work, she explores how artists respond to political change, censorship, and questions of historical memory across the Americas. There will be time for Q&A at the end. Thank you again for joining us, and I know you are in for an insightful look into Frida Kahlo and the exhibition. I will turn it over to Elena, and with gratitude to her for joining us this evening.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay? Wonderful. Let me just grab my notes. And it's really fun to be here. It's really a beautiful city to kind of plop into and then be asked to speak with people interested in Frida Kahlo, who I haven't thought about in a while, I'll say, but it was a nice excuse for me to go back and review her legacy and think about what the future of Frida Kahlo is. And hopefully we can explore that a little bit together. I'll try to not be too professorial and be, but if I get boring, just raise your hand and we'll ask a question and we can kind of change paths. And thank you to Allison and everyone at the museum who's been so kind in receiving me and has made this really fun for me. I'm here to talk about Frida. I'll talk about my experience with Frida and how it has influenced me and my work, and also what has been done with Frida, right? And so how this is a little bit different, how this changes course. And we'll look at a lot of images, and then I have images that are maybe not in the exhibit, but that are important that we can talk about if it comes to that. Also curious to hear what your questions are, what your experiences are. And so, like Allison pointed out, this is a really important show. It features about 35 works by Frida Kahlo and also her artistic legacy. Now, I will say one thing that's kind of interesting about Frida Kahlo is she didn't make that much work. So when you do a show about Frida Kahlo, it's hard to do a big show, right, about it. And so oftentimes, curators will bring in other artists in dialogue, right? Because there just aren't that many works, and a lot of the works are very difficult to get. The Dolores Romero Pagino, which we'll look at in a bit, but they're the biggest collection of Frida works, and they notoriously do not lend the works, right? So that you have to go to Mexico City, go to the southern part of Mexico City in Xochimilco and go see those works. It was one of my favorite museums when I lived in Mexico City. I just learned that they're moving from there, they're renovating. But them renovating, and they'll be moving to Pacific Park, which is a big park in Mexico City, opened up an opportunity for these works to be lent, right? Because now so this was a really a beautiful option for them in Houston, and María Ramirez, who's a very renowned and important curator in my field, to tackle this topic, which even she was a little bit at first, she's mentioned, Frida show, another one, but she really, I think, took this to very interesting new heights. So this show that's there now will travel to the Tate. So this is a kind of collaboration between the Tate and the MFA in Houston. So I'll start with my exposure to Frida. So kind of thinking about it through my past. Before I decided I was going to study Latin American art, which really wasn't the thing in the 90s when I was sort of interested in it, there was Frida, and Frida was a really important figure. She was one of the first Latin American artists to sell a work of art for over $1 million, and that was Madonna who bought her work. So, and I'll show you the work, even though Madonna does not lend that work, even though it's very important for her. So, but we'll look at it anyway. And I knew Frida because I had read this biography by Hayden Herrera, who by all means is the sort of classic biography on Frida Kahlo, even though there were two earlier ones by very important Mexican scholars, Teresa de Conde and Ricardo Pujol, who wrote kind of biographical, Teresa de Conde in 1976 said that Frida's life was kind of more interesting than her work. And this is the first English language biography of Frida's work. And she really used kind of biography to understand the work, right? So Frida's biography became very integral to how we understand the work. Now, let me ask you all a question. Has everyone seen and knows what Frida looks like, right? So raise your hands, right? So yeah, she's iconic in that way. And, maybe there are other artists that you know, but you maybe don't know. I mean, there are iconic artists in art history, but maybe you don't know what they look like, right? And so this is what makes Frida so interesting, is that she has this iconicity. We can immediately identify her. We know there are certain characteristics that make her easily kind of identifiable in a crowd, right? In any way. We have the eyebrows, the kind of jewelry, the dress, and, very intense stare that's, very iconic in her work. And also because she paints a lot of self-portraits and she was a very interesting personality, so a lot of people took photographs of her. So there are a lot of circulating images about her from, the 40s, really from the 30s, 40s, up until her death, 1954. And then when she gets taken up again, kind of in the 90s. And so in 2002, there was an excellent film. I just realized that the text, in my slide isn't showing up. So if you need information that's not there, I can provide it. But this was a really, I think, important film from 2002 with Salma Hayek. And there is actually a newer one from 2024 by Kahlo, who's a Peruvian. It's a documentary. She's a Peruvian director, and it premiered in Sundance 2 years ago, and I actually did the Q&A at Sundance for that film. And I remember walking in and thinking, wow, Frida still fills a room, right? It was impressive to me, and it was impressive to me the very intergenerational tenor of the crowd in that space. There were very young people, high school kids, to older people, and I thought that's really interesting because there are few, I think, right, if there was a Rembrandt show, I don't know that it would draw the high school students. Okay, so the other interesting thing I wanted to tell you was when I started studying art in Latin America together, separately though, because it wasn't a thing yet, I took a class called Frida and Her Circle. This was in 1996-ish. And this was another opportunity that I had to kind of think about Frida's work in dialogue with artists that were working at the same time as her. And what's interesting, and what I want you to walk away with, if anything else, is Frida wasn't alone as a woman artist working at that time. There was a group of women artists who were very important. There was Elena Carrington, there was Maria Izquierdo, Olga Costa, Remedios Varo, who's a surrealist artist who's very well known these days and kind of is featured now. The last biennial I went to, or maybe 2 biennials ago in Venice, both of those artists featured. So that the artists from that period are kind of increasingly being embraced today and rethought and appraised, I guess. Okay, so I just have this image because, this is why she's so well known. I mean, I can guarantee you, as someone who teaches this work, that if I go into a room of any, in any classroom and I say, do you know Frida Kahlo? Yes. Can you name any other Latin American artist? No. No, it'll just be Frida. So in some ways, she kind of works for me, right? She does a lot of work for me because people already know that there's someone important from Latin America who's a woman artist, and I love that. And I try to piggyback on it to expose students to other artists working in that time frame. But one of the reasons that she's well known is her face and her characteristics circulate a lot on merchandise, and that's something that we'll look at in the exhibit in the Frida Mania section, which is a dedicated section of this exhibit, yes. So a little bit about Frida, just for those who don't know our biography, and because it's sort of important. She was born in 1907, and she grew up in the Casa Azul. Who's been there? Just raise your hands. Okay, great. Well, if you haven't been there, go. It's really fun. I remember going there, in the 90s, and I just found out that you were chief curator, Courtney, and I had met in Mexico City when I was living there in the 90s. So it's a very, very full circle moment for me to be here talking about that now. But it used to be that you could just go. You didn't have to make a reservation. There was no line. Now, if you don't reserve, you will not get in. So if you go, please make a reservation. But it's a really fun place to see her work. They now opened another museum. This is kind of a sister called the Red House. And there has been a lot of critique about that. I don't want to get into details about that, but if you go to Mexico City, you know that you have the Blue House, which is the original, and the new Red House, which people have some issues with. Okay, so Frida had a childhood bout with polio. And she's 17 here. You can see her on the left, kind of cross-dressing. And so her life was filled with a lot of medical problems, which sort of really surfaces throughout her work because she had to deal a lot with doctors, with hospitalizations. And the polio really just left one of her legs shorter than the other. But then she was also in a bus accident when she was 18. And that was quite severe and really defined her life. And she had lifelong health issues. Her leg was eventually amputated in 1953, and then she died shortly after in 1954. But yeah, let me just show you. Oh, and I just wanted to point out that one of the things that makes Frida really relevant today is the ways in which she adapted tendencies that we now, think of as de rigueur today. But they were not in the 50s. Cross-dressing was not, something that was done, but she was doing it. So she was sort of gender bending. She was an activist. She was an activist for LGBTQ rights. All of these things that have become so well accepted today that she was a pioneer of. And we'll talk a little bit about how that happened. She was also very politically engaged. She was sort of a card-carrying member of the Communist Party, which she joined in 1927, and this is when she meets Diego Rivera, who's her husband, and so this is when they kind of become a thing, and a thing that kind of defines her life. But I wanted just to show you that this is a photo of Frida from when she was 19, and this is by Guillermo, her father, who was a German photographer who was married to her mother, who was from Mexico. But she was exposed to artistic procedures through his photography, right? So she was kind of a part of this world and understood art already from a very young age, right? As being part of his studio, accompanying his photography, etc. And she was really beginning her career as an artist in the 1920s when she meets Diego Rivera, this sort of very massive name in Mexican art. But I just wanted to show you just a few things, a few ways in which her lifelong health problems come up in her work. And so this is the broken column, a very classic work in which you could see some of the problems. She had all kinds of surgeries, right? And you could see the braces that she wore. And as a result of these images, a lot of artists who are disabled and disabled rights activists really also are interested in Frida, and so she's getting a resurgence within and among that group, and they're writing about her and they're thinking about what Frida offered, right, throughout her kind of artistic career. But so back to Diego. Here we can see them. They had met in 1927, and then they're married in 1929. That will change. They'll get divorced and remarried. So they have a sort of complex relationship that defines Frida's, really whole life until, and even when he passes away. But you can see that she then painted a work in 1931, and it says here, "You see us, me, Frida Kahlo, with my beloved husband, Diego Rivera. I painted these portraits in the beautiful city of San Francisco, California, for our friend Mr. Albert Bender, and it was the month of April of the year 1931, and that is written on the ribbon that is just above. And you can see that she paints Diego Rivera, as an artist with the paintbrushes, and really she does not yet consider herself an artist, even though she's making a lot of work, right? Because there isn't the sort of grand moments of Mexican art at this time of making big murals. And so I'll show you an example of that. But moving on, this is, that museum that I told you about that has this excellent collection in this museum that I very much love, that's no longer there, so I'm lamenting with you seeing this image of it. But this is kind of what is responsible for a lot of the works in the exhibit. And the exhibit is called The Making of an Icon. And one of the things I want to kind of point out, that when we think about Frida's work, right, at this moment in Mexican history, it's very different from the work of what are known as Los Tres Grandes, or the three large ones, or big ones, David Alcácer, José Clemente Orozco, and Diego Rivera. These are three muralists. They're huge names in Mexican art, and they are getting all the commissions, right? Frida Kahlo cannot work as an artist, cannot live by working as an artist, so she wouldn't make enough money. But the muralists are getting all of the commissions because, Mexico City had just been through a revolution in 1920. They have a kind of revolutionary government that is still active today. It's called the PRI, but at that moment it was quite revolutionary. And they're really interested in these kind of grand scale projects, right? These murals. And I don't know if people have seen murals, just to raise your hands if how many people have seen Mexican murals in Mexico City. Okay, so or it doesn't matter, yeah, but you kind of get a sense, right? So I just have this kind of very big one from the Palacio de Bellas Artes, which is the Fine Arts Museum. If you go to Mexico, you will very likely see it. It's a beautiful museum with murals by a lot of different artists. And but you can see it takes up, right, it's very larger than life, and it tells a narrative story, right, about a particular moment. Many of these stories are motivated by ideological positions that Diego Rivera has, many of them left-leaning, many of them about sort of thinking about art through labor and comparing the painters and artists with the laborers at the time, right? So they also write a manifesto together, etc. So you can see here, this is the syndicate of workers, painters, and sculptors in 1929. When Frida Kahlo is very engaged, but so is Diego Rivera, right? And they're very interested in unionizing and unionizing with the laborers, right? So that artists are considered just laborers. They're not a special kind of class in Mexican society. Now, when we get to Frida Kahlo, we have such a different story because her work is the opposite of that, right? It's very intimate and very small, right? So when we're looking at works by her, so if we kind of think about this work is sorry, I have this in centimeters, but they're usually about page size, so we're looking about this. Some of the paintings are larger, but they're not going to get one. They're never going to be larger than life, right? Only 2 to 3 feet. And so when we're thinking about Frida Kahlo, we need to think about that she's really, very innovative in establishing a different way of thinking art that is sort of intimate, smaller scale, and really about her life. And one of the points of departure for this exhibition is that Maria Carmen, who organized the exhibit with a kind of a curatorial team, didn't want to make this about her pain, right, and her relationship with Diego. That was important to her, to sort of move away from that as a defining feature of how you read Frida Kahlo works, right? So that you would be kind of exploring the work on its own terms. And so they came up with a series of thematic kind of structures, right? So these are the kind of key thematic structures that you'll find in the exhibit. I also wanted to point out to you that I brought the catalog, so if you want to take a look after, please do. It's a beautiful, beautiful catalog, and the reproductions are fantastic. These are, I'll kind of walk through these different categories just so you get a sense of them. But this self-construction, a lot of it is how does she construct, right? So that gives her sort of agency in constructing, but it's not how her disease constructs her, right? Or how her disease makes her, or how her struggles with Diego and their torrid love affairs kind of create her. No, it's how she has agency in structuring and constructing like the biography of who she is. So that is, when we think about these self-portraits, right, this is a part of that construction. And then the second category is surrealist affinities, which I'll show you now. Frida Kahlo, I will say this, and this is important to know, never identified her work as surrealist, right? This was identified by André Breton, who we'll look at in just a minute, who was a French thinker, who saw the work and said, no, this is surrealism, right? This is really surrealist. And I don't know if people know what surrealism is, but you can ask or let me know if you want to know more, because we can probably go down a rabbit hole around surrealism and never get out. But you can see a lot of it is sort of dream inspired, right? And so Breton identifies in this that sort of tendency in her work, and then she travels to Paris and has a show. So it is important. The surrealism is important, but it wasn't what she thought about her work, right? On the other side of the border, so her experience of living and thinking about being in the U.S. versus being in Mexico was really important. She accompanied Diego often, as you saw that she made that work in San Francisco. She accompanied him to Detroit, and we'll look at her work that she did when she's on the border, thinking about border. And it was difficult for her, and living kind of that, thinking about her identity as someone who crosses borders is really interesting, and I think very of the moment today in thinking about identity, right? But this was sort of novel at that time. Gendered dialogues. So this is her impact on kind of other feminist and gender-focused art from the 70s on, and she is very important in Mexico. I just curated an exhibit called Transgresores, where I worked with women artists from the 1970s who were working in Mexico, and they said she was our model, right? We had no other models. There were no women making art, right? And there weren't people we could say, look, these are artists and they're women and they can live from that, right? So artists like Mónica Mayer and Magali Lara, who today are very big names in that world, who are associated with feminism in Mexico City in the 80s until today. For them, Frida was a really important icon, right? So thinking about the legacy of Frida on kind of feminists of our time. And you can see that, Monica and Magali are from the 70s working until today, but there are artists who are young and working today who still identify with Frida and still find her really important. So neo-Mexicanisms, this is, it explores her influence on thinking through what makes something Mexican themes. We'll look at some examples of that. The activist legacy, right? This is something that we already discussed a little bit, but it's a little bit, thinking about her for activism such as disabled activism, right? That's something that's really important to these days. But also Chicano activism in the 1970s. She was taken up by Chicano artists in the 1970s and 80s as an icon, right? They adopted her, and we'll look at what, some of the images that they made around her. And then Frida Mania, which is a section, kind of gallery that was dedicated, and we'll look at some of the objects, in which, there are 200 items of memorabilia, right, that feature her likeness. And I spoke with Arden Decker, who curated that section, and she told me that many of those items were bought on eBay or, in random places like Germany. Someone had a collection of Frida objects that were really interesting. Some small village in Germany. So I always find that curious how it circulates globally, and people are really interested in someone very far from their experience and very far from their life. So just, this is the construction of self room, and this is maybe something that, this is kind of after the surrealist show, but you can see where something like this would be really interesting, right, to Breton, right, with regard to surrealism. But in this section of construction of self, and, obviously the self is very related also to Diego, because he's on her mind. But also this, she chose a particular style of dress, the Tijuana dress, right? She was very interested in that, a particular style of jewelry. That is part of this exhibit, right? You can see that on display, the kinds of different dresses that she really helped popularize in urban society. Now you can find these dresses very easily. They're chic, they're sort of stylish, right? People can go and buy very expensive versions of these. But she was interested in how they were worn where they are from, right? In this isla of Tehuantepec, and she went and would seek them out, and was really unique in wearing them, right? Because it wasn't usual for someone who was married to Diego Rivera, right? A sort of very important person, a cultural figure in Mexico at this time, to be wearing this dress, and she, sort of insisted on it. So I think I don't remember if I mentioned that there are more than 80 artists from all over the world that are represented in this exhibit. So it's Frida in dialogue with these other artists, many from the US, many from Mexico, but really the broad gamut, right? Brazil, etc. There are artists really from everywhere. And yeah, so the 7 sections. And like I said, the goal was to move away or beyond Kahlo's biography to kind of think about her iconicity. Okay, so the next, this is the surrealist note. So like I said, she did not agree with the surrealist label, but, and in fact, she didn't really think of herself as an artist. She had never had a solo show of her work until she had one in New York in 1938. And after 1938 is when we start seeing Frida as the artist, right? But she, one of the things I found out is she used to identify as Frida de la Ribera, like so, by her husband's name. And in 1938, she shifts to identifying as Frida Kahlo, right? So it goes back to her name. And I just wanted to show you this because this, this is a work that was bought in Paris when she showed this, right? And it was called The Frame. It was bought by the Musée du Jeu de Paume, which I think is now associated with the Louvre. And this was bought for $1,000, and it's now in the collection, right, of the Louvre. So we have this Frida Kahlo painting. And so you can see where she starts kind of forging her iconicity through her inclusion in these very important sites and institutions that are associated with the history of art. Okay, so we talked a little bit about her border experience, right? This is when she was living. I was making murals there, and as you know, Diego Rivera had very important commissions in the U.S., and they sort of needed those, and they were always a little bit short on money. I think they weren't very good at managing it from my read of the biography. But you can see where she's sort of standing in the middle, right? She's holding the Mexican flag, and she's kind of stuck in the middle, and she doesn't necessarily seem that happy about it. But this is this kind of representation of the border, a very early representation of the border, and thinking about it through visual art that I find very interesting. In Mexico, we see this history of ruins and this culture, this very strong presence of pre-Columbian cultures, right, that you probably identify if you go. Certainly in Mexico City, you can see it if you go to Teotihuacan or some of the other ancient sites. But you can see those figures. Many of these figures really influenced her, and certainly influenced Diego Rivera in his kind of paintings, and she sort of reacted to them a little bit differently. But I think this is a really wonderful work. And one of the other things I wanted to point out is that she often painted on tin. So she didn't do big canvas work, partially because she often painted from bed because she was often hospitalized and or ill. And so she had, this setup where she could work in bed. And so that, in part was responsible for the kind of small scale or smaller scale of her works. But also, it was, she worked on materials that weren't high art, right? They were tin. There's a kind of a culture of ex votos. I don't know if people have heard of them. It's a colonial culture where sort of a habit or I can't think of the word right now, behavior, where when you make a wish or you ask something of a deity or a god or, and it comes true, then you make an ex voto marking that in gratitude. And so sometimes if you go to churches, you can see these ex votos. They're often on metallic backgrounds, tin or aluminum, I guess, and often noting the miracle or the thing that happened that you're grateful for. And so she was very influenced by that. And, the very early image that I showed you from San Francisco was in the style of an ex voto where you have a ribbon, right, that would often say what you were grateful for, but in this case, she would, put her own spin on that. Okay, so this is the gender dialogue, and I wanted to show you this because this is how sort of contemporary feminist art is taking in, absorbing, consuming, and interacting with Frida Kahlo, right? So we have the Guerrilla Girls. I don't know if people know the Guerrilla Girls. There's an excellent exhibit of their work right now at the Getty Research Institute. If you have an opportunity to go, I would highly recommend it. The Guerrilla Girls are a feminist group from the 1980s, still working today, but one of the things that identifies them is that they are anonymous, they wear masks, and take on the names of women artists from the past. So there's, Kolwitz, there's a Frida Kahlo, and so they wear a gorilla mask and then take on the personality of, and remain anonymous that way, and then also kind of question why institutions don't have the appropriate number of women artists, or why they don't collect women artists, or sort of taking institutions on for their collecting habits. Then we have an artist as disparate as Catherine Opie on the left, who's a photographer who works a lot with gender identity and kind of confounding that or challenging it. And so she is also thinking about bodies, and for a lot of artists who think about bodies and bodies as identities or challenging those identities, they look to Frida, right? So she becomes an important precedent for them. And this is part of the neo-Mexicanisms, and I was I was talking about this work earlier. This is Nelson Zanil. I'm sorry that you can't see this, but Nelson Zanil was an artist working in the 90s. So this is when you see a sort of a resurgence of artists thinking about, in what's known as a sort of neo-Mexican wave of artists. And they're, again, going back to Frida at this moment, right? This is after the, Herrera biography, and she's circulating around more, it's going to lead to Madonna eventually buying a work by her. But here, he has Frida in his heart. Like and Nelson Zanil's work is a lot about his gay identity as a gay man working in the arts. And his work is also, I have seen recently in fairs that parallel Frieze. So there's a sort of interest in his work today. But in the 90s, his work was really focused on thinking about Frida, and for the artists, LGBTQ artists in Mexico in the 90s, Frida was another sort of precedent, someone who was sympathetic to kind of their ideas, sympathetic to thinking about gender not in very fixed or stable ways, but thinking about it as quite mobile. Okay. How are we doing on time? Okay, yeah. And I wanted to show you this. This is an artist who's really interested in this kind of this activist legacy, right? This disabled, right, activism. This is Marcia Morimura, and in our dialogue, this is, of course, that image that we saw earlier in the slideshow. She is restaging that using herself and her body as a disabled woman, thinking about, disabled bodies. And again, I mentioned this before, but the body and its existence, the way it lives in the world, this was all something that Frida made common, made possible within the arts, right? And so this is why it becomes interesting to artists today, and we see this here as well. These are two artists from Chile, and this is Yeguas. Then they're restaging this work, the two Fridas. Now, I would say this is probably among the best known works by Frida Kahlo. Have people seen this before? Yeah. Now, this is a work that's at the Museum of Modern Art, and they will never lend it. It's delicate, and Maricana Ramirez said she tried really hard to get it. If she can't get it, no one can get it, right? She is the, sort of ultimate negotiator, and I think I have great faith that if she wasn't able to get it, it's not possible. But you can kind of see here, but what you do see in the exhibit are the artists that really restage this and for whom this is important. This really struggle with the identity, right? You see a lot of those struggles taking place in some of the images maybe I showed you, but you can see more if you saw the work. But this way in which, she has the Tijuana dress here and the colonial sort of traditional Mexican dress here, and this conflict, right, where they're kind of living together, the two halves of her, and struggling. And I could maybe think about that border image as these two halves of her struggling, right, and to sort of find their way. And I think that struggle is very attractive to artists who are also often trying to depict or represent internal struggle. One second. But if we were going to spend a lot of time on this, which we won't, but you can see that she took the heart out, and the heart is in the woman with the Tijuana dress, right? And this is where she's going. This is where the heart lives. And then I'm showing you how these are kind of positioned, and you can see sort of multiple, right, restagings of those Fridas, or the two Fridas that we'll never see, because unless you go to the Museum of Modern Art in Mexico City, which I recommend too. Okay, and then I mentioned that I was going to talk a little bit about Chicano activists. These images in the 1970s, it became, it was important for Chicanos, the figure of Frida, and she became sort of resuscitated, and there were artists in the Bay Area in San Francisco, an artist whose name is Rupert Garcia. I don't know if he's familiar to you, but he's a very important printmaker. I guess he still is, I'm not sure if he's still alive, but there's a very beautiful print show now at the Huntington in California, where a lot of these works, you can see them in person, but you can also see them here. That was an original photo. I don't know if people can see, but this sort of one in the middle. And Rupert Garcia redid it as a print, right, on the right. And what's interesting is he makes her skin a lot darker, and then he makes her add kind of a Chicana. And that becomes adapted by Chicana culture, and then she becomes a very important figure, right, for, and so one of the essays here in the catalog that you would find if you're interested in that is this kind of relationship, right, to Chicana culture, how she becomes adapted, and how she circulates widely and to the day, right, still she's a very important image and very recognizable one, and you can see, on the image on the left, also Rupert Garcia, that says homenaje a Frida Kahlo, or homage to Frida Kahlo, and it's, I think, to me, really important that Chicano activism takes on a woman artist, right, as their sort of figurehead. Okay, these are just more ways in which she circulates in the Chicano world of California and Texas. And then I wanted to talk about this show, this work. This is, I think, a really interesting one. It's by a Brazilian photographer. Her name is Camila Fontanelle. And between 2012 and 2020, so just before the pandemic, she shot 5,800 portraits of people of all ages, ethnicities, and genders. And they all don, as Frida Kahlo, right? She shot them in, they don these kind of flower crowns and colorful shawls, all of which she was very interested in and which you find recurrent in her work. And you can see how they made a big mural of it, and I think it's such a beautiful way to represent that. I just think it's a great sort of introduction because it's from now, and you can see what artists are doing with it now. And I'll just read you a little bit of what she said. Camilla, the artist, said. I was drawn to the way Frida Kahlo navigated between the feminine and masculine through her clothing and how this was reflected in her works. And then she sort of goes into, how she started asking people to just pose as Frida and taking photos of them. I'll go on because I think we could probably linger too long on this. But I wanted to show you this Frida mania, right, which is what we are probably living in. I think it probably will go away. I mean, this is my feeling. I think it'll continue. But you could see this was the kind of Frida phenomenon, the ubiquitous relationship with consumer culture. And this is what that room looks like, and all of the different objects, right? Backpacks and kitchenware, and really socks. There's no limit to what you'll find. And posters, cards, dolls. Probably if you went into any museum in the US, you would find some of this Frida Kahlo phenomenon present. And so there is this sort of extremely commercial side of things, and I don't know that I have a solution for how to reckon with the very serious artistic legacy that she leaves it with, so important for feminist art, so important for Chicano artists, so important for gay, lesbian, Latino artists working today, but also the very extreme sort of kitschy, right side of her work, which is promoted through this very commercial culture. So if you have thoughts about that, let me know. So the question about relevance today, all of the artists represented in this exhibit responded with very positive views about her continued relevance, because sometimes artists, an artist is important not because they're still important to the artists who are engaging with them, but because they're critiquing them, right? But I think what you find with Frida Kahlo is that they're really engaging her on her terms. They're very interested in what she has to offer still today. And they see her as a figure of resistance, right? They see her, despite this very commercial side of things. And so, it's interesting to me that the idea of the artist as a figure of resistance continues to be important, probably more so today than ever, or, maybe continued. But I just wanted to highlight a few things that were pointed out in the reviews of the exhibit. One notes the curator's success in separating the artist from the melodrama of her biography, right? This is something we talked about, so if you go see the exhibit, that's something you can keep in mind. It emphasizes that while her life was extraordinary, the exhibit ensures the brilliance of her original work, right? Over 30 pieces, is not overshadowed by her fame and by this commercial culture. That was one. And then another review said this highlights the plurality of the exhibit, noting how it provides space for various communities, including Chicano, feminist, LGBTQ plus groups, to identify with different aspects of Kahlo's persona. And I wanted to this is sort of closing around this exhibit, which is a space for people to reflect on what would you say to Frida Kahlo, right? So they can write a letter, and I thought that this was a really nice opportunity for someone in an exhibit to take it all in and then reflect on it and write a letter and kind of think it through. I have a few more images. How are we on time? Okay, let's go to community. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you for your presentation, first of all. I wanted to ask, you talked about how in the past you had taken a course on Frida's inner circle with different female artists.
Yeah.
Did you guys touch on that inner circle in the exhibition? I mean, from her initial years as an artist, so with these.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I was clear. I'm not part of the curatorial team of this exhibit. Yeah, so they did. The curatorial team did. They did, and they, when you go to her early work, you can see works by Maria Stierno, who is very much lesser known, but I think an equally good artist from that period, very much associated with surrealism. And so a lot of these artists that were part of her circle got taken up by surrealism. So her videos viral, and Leonora Paddington, they are exhibited as such. And because André Breton, who was very famous in Paris and France, he was so well known and it was circulating in Paris, it sort of assured that it has a bigger life, right, that it continues to circulate, as opposed to kind of only showing in Mexico. So a lot of those works are still well known, but for some reason they just don't have fantastic kind of biography to accompany it, or it's hard for me to know why those other artists, or maybe their time will come later. I'm not sure. They are known and they do circulate, and they are in the exhibit. Yeah, of course.
What was her relationship with Breton? I mean, he said he called her a surrealist, and she did not call herself.
She didn't call herself, but it sort of worked for her, right? I mean, she went to Paris. He said, I think that they had, it didn't go well. And Frida Kahlo, I think that there were a lot of important people that she broke with, and that it wasn't always smooth. I think she was very charming and very circulated with a very, big names, and then sometimes there would be these tensions, and I think Breton was one of those. But this was after he had already organized an exhibit for her in Paris, and that allowed her work to be bought back and work to frame. So while I think they didn't continue, there are letters, and you can actually find letters in the book, and they're translated, so you can read the letters that she wrote with him, but I think they did eventually break.
And I want to add, sorry, this is what I studied in grad school.
There's something a little bit, I've always felt disingenuous about her rejection of Red Tom.
Yeah.
Because she said, her famous quote, I think it was like in Life magazine, was,
Yeah.
I didn't even know what surrealism was until Red Tom told me I was one.
Yeah.
But Diego had been writing about surrealism for 10 years. I mean, there's no way she didn't know.
Yeah.
And he's the reason, sorry, she had to show at the Julian Levy Gallery.
Yeah.
So she was super complicated, and she definitely used that relationship in a way that kind of was a springboard.
Yeah, and she would have had to, right? Because how else would you make it in the art world at the time?
Yeah, especially as a woman.
But like, I mean, I think about me, would I be friends with her? I'm not sure, probably not. Right? Like, yeah, I would really feel bad.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
There's just apparently just one company that owns Frida Kahlo rights.
It's not a company, her family owns they determine, who gets rights, but the Lotus Hotel has a lot of the work.
Like when you wanna license something, you have to go
To her family.
company.
You have to go through her family, and it's not easy.
Well, it's
But not the Lotus Hotel, like that's the museum. That the Lotus Hotel is a collector who collected her early work, and then she made a museum for that work, like we see these days with sort of private collectors.
seems like that's the hardest thing to square. It's not really there's a lot of artists, commercialize their art for their families who work at a company does.
Yeah.
I mean, she was, dyed-in-the-wool card-carrying Stalinist, so it was absolutely against all forms of capitalism. So that seems like the ultimate.
I mean, she was pretty against that, yeah, but she also has to live, and so, I do think, but yeah, she probably wouldn't have foreseen the turn that her work would take in the contemporary period, and maybe would not be very happy about it. Almost certainly, yeah.
The first photograph I recall her, was that a year after her accident?
I think it was the year before. Maybe not the family one, you're talking about the other one. Let me go to it.
And I'm wondering why she's, now is that before or after her accident?
It's after. Yeah, after
She's
the accident.
actually sitting up and
Yeah, because for a while she was okay. I mean, the problems were sort of lingered after.
she probably was in her braces there, or no?
I can't remember if she, I don't know if she had to always wear it, but
I wonder.
it's likely, yeah, it's possible.
She's just beautiful. I mean,
Yeah, she was always beautiful, even with the brace. And, she had a lot of issues because she wanted to have a child, and she had a miscarriage, famously. And I mean, I'll just show you the work because this is the work that Madonna has. And then, sorry, my pointer went somewhere that I don't see. I don't know how to, I just have to go through this. Okay, so this is when she loses her child. This is when she's in Detroit at the Henry Ford Hospital. Now, I will say she's like among the very first to paint a miscarriage, right? To represent a miscarriage. This was not something talked about. It wasn't even talked about 20 years ago in the U.S., right? She's talking about it in the 1930s, making it very public. But this is the work by Madonna that Madonna does not lend. That Madonna bought in the 90s, and it's called My Birth, and this you can see this very complex structure. I mean, this we could unpack. It would take us a period, another kind of hour lecture to unpack this. But but she had constant health problems, and as a result of that, but when she was younger, I think she managed them better, and then as she got older, they sort of haunted her quite a bit more. Yeah.
I was just wondering in research, was there anything ever written about her brow or when she decided to grow it? Because it's very iconic.
Yeah, it's very iconic. Yeah, people do work on it, and I mean, this is the thing with Frida. People work on a lot of different facets of her. And the unibrow, which she sort of deliberately highlighted as a kind of gender bending kind of facial characteristic, that was intentional, right? And I think something that she embraced, much like the cross-dressing photo that we saw, because it was a way to challenge the more accepted means of femininity. I think she always challenged what it meant to be feminine, especially in Mexico and in 20th century Mexico. But I think that was very attractive, right? Because that's another mode of resistance.
One more, time for one more. Anybody have any question about that?
Did Diego and Frida, was there a lot of conflict with regards to their artwork? No, I know they had conflict as married people.
Right, and it's, you know, I think, Frida was very enamored with Diego's art and his art. So she was his sort of big fan. I don't know enough about, the minutiae of what she wrote while they were separated, which there were, different periods in which she left him or they were separated. He had affairs, she had affairs with very high profile people. He had affairs with her sister, among others, and who is now responsible for the Red House and, just but anyway, that's just gossip and that's not so interesting. But yeah, I think the work was actually, what kept them together. Like this was the platform of respect that they were able to cultivate and to maintain because they really believed in it and believed in each other. So I think that's quite beautiful. Well, I did want to show you the very last image of her. This is the last photo taken in 1954, where she went to her exhibit, right, in a wheelchair, and she was able to see the fruits, of her labor and the success of it, and I thought that that's, very lovely. I also wanted to mention a few other things before we leave, which is one, this is a production that's going on now. It'll happen in March. It's a collaboration between MoMA and the Metropolitan Opera, and they're doing a Frida and Diego opera, and if we have time, I'll play, and I think that you all have a way to see that, so maybe it'll come, I don't know, but you can go see this in New York if you go to the Met, and then Netflix is developing a drama series based on Frida and Diego. I know, just when you thought you could get enough, but no, you can, and there'll be more. And so you'll be able to see this. It's coming soon. And I'm curious what will happen. You never know with these things. Like sometimes it just goes in directions that I just don't appreciate, but that doesn't mean much. I mean, other people appreciate it, and obviously it's going well for her. Yeah, but it always impresses me, Frida, and her capacity to generate audiences then and now. I have to say I sometimes don't understand it, but I appreciate it and want to continue to foster that in any way that I can. Also, as a sort of entryway into the many other artists that I work on, they're equally good and that no one knows about. But just really as an opportunity to open a door rather than to be the only door, right? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Elena, for making an announcement. It's actually on view until May 17th at the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, so if you have a chance to travel there, now that you have a really good background for that. I would like to also invite you to our next talk. It's in April 7th, with a local art historian, Elaine French. We're talking about Raphael. And there's an exhibition at the Met right now, or that's opening very soon. They've been very well prepared for if you think to talk on it. So thanks again. Thank you.
Absolutely, my pleasure.